I'm going to begin by showing you this cardiac cycle.
The heart is a pump which must circulate blood through two different but interconnected vascular systems. The smaller of these systems is the pulmonary system. Blood returning from the upper part of the body is delivered to the right atrium of the heart by the superior vena cava, one of the body's two largest veins, while blood returning from the lower part of the body is delivered to the right atrium by the other major vein, the inferior vena cava. Contraction of the right atrium in each cardiac cycle forces blood into the right ventricle. This is followed by contraction of the right ventricle, which pumps blood into the pulmonary artery, sending it on through the blood vessels of the lungs. As the right ventricle contracts and pressure within the right ventricle rises, the tricuspid valve situated at the opening between the right atrium and right ventricle shuts, preventing any backflow. The pressure generated by contraction of the right ventricle soon opens the pulmonary valve and blood enters the circulation of the lungs. After passing through the circulation of the lungs, the blood, having been recharged with oxygen and having rid itself of carbon dioxide, is returned through the pulmonary veins to the left atrium. The left atrium, too, contracts, forwarding blood into the left ventricle in order to fill it before it contracts. As the powerful left ventricle contracts, the mitral valve shuts, preventing backflow into the left atrium. The aortic valve opens and blood is forced into the aorta, which distributes it to the rest of the body apart from the lungs. As the contraction comes to an end and pressure in the aorta falls, the aortic valve snaps shut to prevent backflow into the left ventricle.
Having looked at this image, here are some questions I'd like you to answer. Does the heart lie in the pericardial cavity? And James is stabbed and there's bleeding in the pericardial cavity. So what does the blood therefore lie between? So answer the question, and here's what the correct answers are. First of all, does the heart lie in the pericardial cavity? This is false, because if you look at this image, this is the area of the pericardial cavity, this in blue. The heart is only surrounded by the pericardial cavity. It's not lying in the pericardial cavity. Only fluid lies in the pericardial cavity. And the next question, which says he is stabbed and the blood is in the pericardial cavity. So what is the blood between? The blood is between the parietal and visceral layers of the serous pericardium. So remember, again, if you look at it, the fibrous pericardium is this gray area on the outside. So it's this gray area on the outside, that one. The serous pericardium is this parietal layer and the visceral layer, and that's where the blood is lying. So it's very important to know that. Now let's go to the next. So you should be looking at these, the borders, the sulci. I showed you the cardiac cycle. Now here are some questions that you have to look at. What is the difference in blood entering the atria? So read this carefully. On which surface is most of the left atrium seen? And the radiologist says that the inferior border of the heart has shifted. The chambers contributing to this border have enlarged. And which chambers is he referring to? And the atria lie superior to the ventricles. Is this a true or false statement? And then you look at the chambers, then here are some questions to do with the chambers. Sulci and grooves are external and septa are internal. Is this a true or false statement? And which of the following is not true about the right atrium? So you can pause and look at the choices and see which one you would have chosen. And then you look at the ventricular chambers, and here are some questions regarding the ventricular chambers. So you can read this. Which of the following statements is incorrect? And what would happen if the pulmonary valve was stenosed or narrowed? Where would blood back up? And the backflow of blood from the ventricles to the atria is prevented by which of these? So having looked at the cardiac cycle, you should be able to answer these. So now let's just go back and look at the correct answers. So we did this one. So let's look at this. What is the difference in blood entering the aorta? Remember, if you looked at the cardiac cycle, that the right side of the heart is deoxygenated venous blood. So the deoxygenated venous blood enters the right, and oxygenated venous blood enters the left. Remember, the pulmonary veins, they carry oxygenated blood, and the superior and inferior vena cava carries deoxygenated. So this is the correct answer. And let's look at the next question. On which surface is most of the left atrium seen? Most of the left atrium is seen on the posterior surface. So if you look at this image, you can see this. This is the posterior surface, and you can see this is most of the left atrium. So that's the posterior surface, and most of the left atrium is seen on that. Then the next question was, the inferior border of the heart has shifted. Which chambers have enlarged? Remember, the inferior border is formed by both ventricles. So it's the left and the right ventricle. So again, if you look at this image, this is the inferior border. So you can see it's formed by both ventricles. So that's why that is the correct answer. And let's look at this one. The atria lie superior to the ventricles. This is true. Again, if you look at the image, just look at this. The atria are lying above the ventricles or superior to the ventricles. And then here, sulci and grooves are external and septa are internal. This is a true statement. Septum is like a wall. It is present in between structures. So it's inside. Sulci, which are the coronary and the interventricular sulci, they are external. So this is a true statement. Then which of the following is not true about the right atrium? So go through each one and look at this. And the only statement which is not true is this one, that the pulmonary veins open into this chamber. They don't. Remember, pulmonary veins go into the left atrium. This is asking about the right. Everything else is true. Then we had this one. Which of the following statements was incorrect? And if you look at this, the moderator band is not seen in the left ventricle. It is seen in the right ventricle. Look at this. This is the right ventricle. See this? This has been highlighted. This is the moderator band seen in the right ventricle. Everything else is true. Tricuspid does prevent blood going from right ventricle to right atrium. Left has the thickest walls, and sinuses filling with blood close the semilunar valves. Now, if the pulmonary valve was stenosed, where would blood back up? So the pulmonary valve is stenosed. That means blood cannot go from the right ventricle into the pulmonary trunk. So it would back up in the right ventricle. So that is the correct answer. So look at that cardiac cycle carefully. And this one, the backflow of blood from the ventricles to the atria is prevented by, this is from ventricles to atria. So it will be the atrioventricular valve. So it is this one, closure of the atrioventricular valves by the chordae tendineae. So remember, it's the chordae tendineae which close the atrioventricular, and in the semilunar, it's the sinuses filling up with blood that closes the semilunar valves. Okay, so it's important to look at this picture very, very carefully. And what you do is you kind of superimpose this on this, so that you know that these blood vessels travel with this, the ones on the posterior aspect travel with this, and this one on the side, a marginal, will travel with this. Also notice these two anterior cardiac veins which drain separately. So let's look at some of the questions that go with this. So it asks, if the left anterior descending, or what's called anterior interventricular artery, were thrombosed, which areas of the heart would be affected? Which vein travels with the posterior descending artery? Which of the following veins does not join the coronary sinus? So really important to look at that picture. So let's look at this one. If the LAD were thrombosed, which areas of the heart would be primarily affected? So it would be the left ventricle, the right ventricle, and the interventricular septum, because this left anterior descending supplies, you can see it will supply the left, the right ventricle, and it also gives off branches which go perpendicularly down to supply the interventricular septum. So it will supply both of them. So that's why the last choice is the correct one. Let's look at this one. Which vein travels with the posterior descending artery? And again, if you look at this picture really carefully, look at this. This is the middle cardiac vein. This arrow should have been up here, which travels with the posterior descending artery. So it would be the middle cardiac vein. And here, which of the following veins does not join the coronary sinus? It is the anterior cardiac veins. Again, look at the picture. These anterior cardiac veins, they drain directly into the right atrium. Then you look at the conducting system. So, you kind of look at these pictures. Notice how the AV node is so close to the interventricular septum. Notice how the AV bundle and the bundle of His and the right and left bundles are related to the interventricular septum. So this one is close to the interatrial and these in the interventricular. So if the interventricular septum had a defect, would it affect the conduction system? Yes, because then it would involve the bundle of His, which is part of the conducting system. So really important to know that. So these are some of the questions that I would have asked in class.